Welcome to Coronation Personal Finance Series, Part 2. My name is Yemi Kuka, and I have here with me Zahid Alamutu. He's the Chief Risk Officer for Coronation Merchant Bank. How are you today, Zahid?
Yeah, I'm fine, Yemi. And you?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's my pleasure to be with you here.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
All right. So today, we're going to be discussing managing debt. So let's jump in. Please, can you tell us more about the steps to manage debt?
Okay, so there are various steps to manage debt, and sometimes in no particular order. But I think the first thing for me is to be proactive and ask yourself, do you have the capacity to take on that debt and manage it? I think that's very important, because if from beginning you are taking on a debt that you don't have the capacity to pay, clearly, even if the character is there, because there's no capacity, there will be issues, and it can actually put you in a distress. So you have to ask yourself, do you have the capacity to take on the debt that you want to take? If it is necessary, then how much can you pay? Reasonably. I think that's the first thing for me. So apart from having that, the next thing is that if you're in debt, it's good to have a proper assessment of your debt. For some people, I think they are not organized, so they have debt, they're owing here and there. And so they have no good hold, they don't have any good hold on their debts. So at any point in time, you should know what your obligations are and then how you want to meet those things. So that assessment is very important. What are the various debts or borrowings that you have? Now, the other thing then is, what are the terms of those borrowings? For some people, are you paying back daily? Is it monthly? Is it quarterly? You need to have a good hold on that. Now, the next natural thing then is budgeting. Budgeting is very important, either for an individual or for any organization. And what budgeting does is that it helps you to put in clear terms, what are my obligations and how do I fulfill those obligations? It's so important because for some people, sometimes the issue is not the capacity to pay. So you take, for example, you earn, let's say 5 million naira, and you're taking on a debt of, let's say 200,000 naira. Every other thing being equal, subject to other obligations that you have, you will think it shouldn't be an issue to pay. But if most of your 10 million will come by December, and then you need to borrow early in January, then it's important for you to check your cash flow to say, look, if I'm borrowing in January, how do I ensure that I'm able to meet up my repayments? Or do I structure my debt in such a way that I can borrow now, but my repayment will come when my revenue, will come in, or when my cash flow will come in December. So that's what budgeting does for you. Budgeting helps you to match both your revenue or your inflow and then your outflow, so that at any point in time, you are sure that you can fulfill whatever obligations, that you have. So I think that's also a very, very important step that you have to take as far as, loan is concerned. The other thing is that there are instances when even your own revenue or your income pattern will change. So you may have a situation where you have to do maybe a refinancing of a restructuring of your debts. Restructuring could mean that, maybe I'd said before that I'm going to be paying monthly. But right now, my inflows will come in more quarterly. It may make sense to say, look, renegotiate and say that I'm going to pay quarterly rather than monthly, so that you don't, put yourself under undue stress. So that's what restructuring, does for you. Restructuring sometimes could also mean that if your debt, for example, based on initial terms, is to be paid in 2 years, you could ask for extension and say, look, I would rather pay this, in 4 years. And the implication of that is, if you are paying X amount before under 2 years, the Y amount that you'll be paying in 4 years will obviously be lower than, what you will pay, as X. So that also helps, to ease the burden of debt and ease, loan repayments. I think that's also very important. And maybe related to that sometimes is to do a refinancing of debts. So refinancing, for example, could mean, I'll give an example. So if I've taken on a debt and maybe I took it up from someone, and at that point, the interest rate, was high. I took it at, let's say, 20%. Now I have someone who is offering to take maybe 15%. Obviously, 15% will be more attractive because it's cheaper for me. And if that person is willing to take on my debt, I would rather refinance my existing, debt obligation, so that the cost of that debt can be cheaper for me. So also that's another thing to consider. And sometimes to help you have a good hold on your debt and repayment, you could also decide to consolidate your debt. Sometimes people have borrowed here and there, and then there are various, repayments to make, obligations to make, and they don't have a good grasp of when that, payments are due and all that. If you are to consolidate your debts, and maybe maximum you have to repay twice or once in a month or so, it also helps and puts you in a better situation to meet your obligations once they are due. I think that's also important. Maybe in an extreme case,
Right.
you could also consider cancellation of debts.
Right.
Or maybe not outright cancellation. It could be some form of debt forgiveness,
Right.
reduction. And that typically can happen if you consider that the interest is high. And so as for that, morally, maybe your condition has changed. For example, somebody took up a personal loan.
Right.
And at that time, that person had a good job. And for whatever reason, you've suffered job loss.
Right.
So there's no way you're going to repay. You could ask that, they also reduce interest for you.
Right.
You could also ask that they suspend interest until maybe when you're able to, get another regular cash flow or,
Right.
income or revenue. I think those are also possible. I think essentially I would just put all that in to say that, look, you can always negotiate, your terms as much as possible. But what is important really is to be transparent, and to have that willingness, to pay as and when due.
Okay, thank you very much. That's really insightful.
You're welcome.
Then let's go into tools and resources.
Okay.
So many times when people get in debt, they or before they even get into debt, they always wonder and how can they prevent this? And then, when they do get into this debt or when they owe a lot of money and they're not sure how to pay, what kind of tools and resources are available? So maybe we start off with, preventing first. So what are the tools or resources people can use to prevent getting into debt?
To prevent getting into debt is not to take debts. So I assume that if you are, responsible, you won't do that if it's not necessary. So I'm assuming that to get into debt at all is because it's necessary for you to do so. And if it is, you shouldn't find yourself in a situation where, like I earlier said, you have taken on more debt than you can repay or you can manage.
Yeah.
Now, in financial terms, it is called being over leveraged. So if you're over leveraged, what that means is that you've taken on more debt in simple language than you have the capacity, to repay. And that could be a problem, for you. I think, first of all, that should be avoided as much as possible. It's always good to live, within your income or your capacity. I think that's very important. You can always delay gratification. You find a situation where, there are things nice to have, there are things you want to do, but you can't afford them now. Delay is not denial. You can always wait until such a time when it's convenient or you can afford it. I think that's the first thing I would like to say. Now, if you must take on debts, the next thing then is, what is the maximum amount of debt that I can take?
Right.
Given my reality in terms of my revenue or maybe my income, as the case may be. Now, there are various apps that are available on the internet, that you can use. And a good number of these apps are also free. You can download them, and then they probably ask you a few questions and then come up with, maybe a model or a cash flow for you that will let you know how much you can, reasonably take without causing under duress or, being unnecessary burdens. I think that's possible. Okay. Now, the other thing, if you're unsure, sometimes it's also to seek professional advice.
Yes.
You can go to financial advisors. There are people who can ask you questions, advise you, on what kind of debt you can take or we should take. I think that also does help.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
And then maybe finally for me is that as much as possible, still going back to don't take on debt except you need it.
Yeah.
Especially when you need money. Now you have all kinds of loan sharks. All kinds of people who will come and jump at you and say, look, you can take 5 million here and there, you can take 10 million. Sometimes the terms are not very clear.
Yeah.
You're already into it and then you realize that you're paying so much.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important that you understand what the terms are if you must take on, such debts.
Yes.
And then it's very clear to you that you can meet those obligations.
Yeah.
That's very important.
That would be predatory lenders. So you have to
Yes.
be aware of them.
You are very correct, Jenny.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's true.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I would like to ask you one more question.
Please go ahead.
So do you think debt is bad? Do you think it can be
Oh,
useful?
no, debt is not bad. I think I had that misconception when I started out in my career. I used to think if you're a debtor as if it was a bad thing. But I've since realized that, look, there's nothing bad in debt. As a matter of fact, maybe I should ask this question. Is there anything bad in banking?
No.
Okay, so if there's nothing bad in banking, then the way a bank operates, a bank survives on debts.
Yeah.
If I must say, so what a bank does is that you have the owners or the shareholders who have X amount of money that they have contributed or put together.
Yeah.
And then customers will come and, deposit money in the bank.
Yeah.
Those deposits are like debts.
Yeah.
Because if the customers come calling for their money, the bank must be able to pay them.
Yeah.
But those are very important because without those kind of funds, the bank cannot fulfill, its core objective or obligation.
Yeah.
So as a bank, we collect money from surplus end and then we channel it to deficit end. So we're borrowing too as a bank.
Yeah.
So debt is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, if you are going to grow and be large, you actually need some debt. It's called, leveraging on what you don't have, if I put it that way.
Yeah.
So what that means is that if I have 10 million and I want to do business that is worth maybe 50 million,
Right.
I can take on debt of 40 million.
Yeah.
If it's very clear to me that, look, I'm able to survive, I'm able to pay that money.
Yeah.
So I achieve what I want to achieve and then gradually pay back my money.
Yeah.
So debt is good where it is within your capacity to do so,
Right.
where it is utilized for the right reasons or the right
Yes.
cause. It's actually a good thing,
Right.
really. And what this also does maybe to individuals sometimes is that you can have, benefits,
Yeah.
early enough and then pay back, later. You understand? So
Yes.
that's what debt does for you. So debt is not bad, but you must know the reason why you're taking on debt.
Yeah.
Must be very clear to you and you must have clarity how you're going to pay back the debt
Payment
as well.
plan, yes.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're
Really
welcome,
pleasure
Jenny.
having you here.
Same here.
I really appreciate you coming on this episode. It was very insightful. Every knowledge you shared with us today. And I hope our viewers have been able to learn a thing, more than a thing actually, but two about how to manage them, how to navigate this situation if you find yourself, over leveraged as Zahid has called it. So thank you once more, Zahid.
Thank you, Yemi, and it's my pleasure. Thank you, viewers.
All right. And for our viewers, thank you for joining us on this episode. I hope you've been able to learn a lot from what we've shared. And of course, always ensure you use the right resource. More importantly, consult with a professional for financial advice when it comes to managing debt or navigating this kind of situation, because it can be stressful if you don't have the proper guidance. So it's the end of today's episode, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you for joining us on Coronation Personal Finance Series.